the starting point for CoST is the framework that infrastructure is at the end, in the end, a public good. It is meant to serve citizens. Government is a key party because they are the sponsors. They need to be the sponsors of much of the infrastructure. The private sector's role is as an agent, and both government and the private sector ultimately are accountable to citizens. So the challenge that we are trying to address at CoST is building trust between these three stakeholders: government, business, and citizens. So we have developed a framework, and it is just a framework, I emphasize. It is not a toolkit that fits all situations. It is extremely conceptual, but the broad elements of this framework are three pillars that need to come together in different ways to build trust. The first is data, standardized data on infrastructure at different points of the life cycle of projects. And not just data for the sake of data, but the data needs to be collected systematically in an accurate manner. And most importantly, data needs to be open. So it needs to be shared. So that's the first pillar of the CoST framework. The second is trying to turn data into actionable information. And that requires what we call an assurance process or an independent review. My personal view is that it doesn't necessarily have to be independent as in a third party or a fourth party outside of government, private sector, and citizens, an independent consultant. It can be data that is made available for use and analysis, even, let's say, by the Controller General of government. But the point is that you have a third party that is independent of the contracting parties that evaluates the data and analyzes it and makes it available. So that's the second pillar, turning data into information through a third party engagement. And the third pillar, which is the most important, is actually bringing all three stakeholders in what we call the multi-stakeholder group, the MSG. And the MSG is actually, the conception of it is that there needs to be a safe space. A safe space where senior middle-level bureaucrats in charge of particular projects come face to face with contractors who are dealing with day-to-day problems, and some representation of civil society. And civil society participation in this need not be that of a monitor or a policeman. Civil society's participation in this primarily is to give voice to their views and concerns, because any project causes dislocation, it causes all kinds of problems potentially for the community. It's important to hear their voice. But all these conversations need to be had in a space that people can trust. And so, to your point, Nazir, about identifying the right individuals, it's really important to get the right people to constitute the MSG, because then it becomes a constructive space for frank exchange of ideas. And if that, but trust is a very delicate thing. It requires one bad actor and the whole thing can crumble. So this is not a solution that is made for guaranteed success. There have been many cases of failure. We are operating in 21 countries, and what we found is when all these three elements come together, it begins over time to make difference. And it can be different in different circumstances depending on the context. You can be successful in applying this tripartite framework for small projects, community-based projects. In some countries, we've had success in doing it at the provincial level. In some countries, it has even made a difference at the national level. I can give you a couple of examples. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in Thailand. And Thailand, is an interesting political economic context. And I had the privilege of meeting the governor of Bangkok province. And it really struck me. He was very enthusiastic about the CoST framework because it gave him a mechanism to drive change in the way, at least in Bangkok province, he and his team were conceptualizing, implementing, and delivering infrastructure. In Uganda, this process has helped actually bring changes to the bidding process. So it's created enough trust that instead of having, on average, 1.5 bids per project, in 3 years, they went to 12.5 bidders per project. Because smaller bidders, local bidders, felt more confident that their bids would actually stand a chance of getting a fair evaluation, if you like. So numerous examples like that, but the takeaway is data, turning data into information, building some kind of structure that allows conversation and discussion between the stakeholders concerned. Last point I wanted to make is that, and this is very difficult to do and maybe to translate into something more operational, what we are trying to do, given how complex, as engineers understand, infrastructure projects are, it's very difficult to turn this process into accreditation or compliance. Or say, there's zero tolerance for corruption and that's our policy, or to say that I have a FIDIC contract and this will solve all our problems, or to say that I have an ISO accreditation and that solves our problems. So I have that stamp of approval and everything is hunky-dory. What we are really trying to do is to acknowledge and understand the complexity of these projects, provide discretion to all parties involved to deal with unforeseen circumstances that appear during implementation, and give them an opportunity to solve those problems as they occur, rather than have black and white decisions, oh, this is not lowest price, or this is not as per this clause of the contract, right? And for bureaucrats or people bound by legally enforceable contracts to enforce this discretion is very hard. We've made it very hard. So collectively, I'd urge actually this group to think about, can we design a process that allows us to build or create more collaborative contracts rather than the black and white accreditation, compliance-based approaches that we have. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. You covered a lot and gave us a lot to think about, and I think FIDIC is trying to make a step in the right direction with all the stakeholders. And